So welcome everyone to the National Political Education Committee's event, Stopping the Police State. My name is Sarah Callahan. I will be hosting. I'm on the steering committee of NPEC. Behind the scenes is Luke, and he's going to be managing all of the tech stuff. So that's awesome. Chat will be disabled. So if you have any questions, go ahead and just enter it into the Q&A section. And then Luke will hand that over to us for the panelists to answer. All right. So we have 3 questions for our panelists. The first one being just speaking to their work in regards to the police and policing in their area. So I'm going to introduce the panelists. So first up is going to be Eric Nava-Pérez, who is a longtime socialist organizer based off of East Harlem, New York City. He's a member of the Bronx Uptown Manhattan branch of the NYC DSA chapter and the Americas subcommittees of DSA International Committee. Eric has been organizing with street venues for more than 2 years to legalize their work and avoid getting caught up in the criminal justice system. For street venues, fighting the police state is about fighting for access to public space. And Eric, do you want to go ahead and just speak to what's going on and about your present work?
Hi, thank you, Sarah. Yeah, sure. As you mentioned, thank you all for having us. Yeah, currently I work as a community organizer with the Street Vendor Project here in New York City. And I actually almost missed this event because some of the vendors that we work very closely with in here in Queens, New York, they were kind of fending off from being, or were dealing at least with sanitation police and not get evicted from their workplaces this morning, and actually for a couple of days now. And so, this is one of the things that vendors have been dealing with more recently. But historically, at least in New York, all types of agencies have had jurisdiction over street vending, and this includes, the New York Police Department, the Department of Sanitation, New York. More recently, we saw the Department of Consumer and Worker Protection, which there's been some changes recently around that, and I think those are the main 3 or 4. There's a couple more that also have some jurisdiction over street vending. But really, during the pandemic, a lot of vendors came out to the streets to sell all types of products. And it was facilitated by a statement that de Blasio made back in 2020 about, I think end of the spring 2020, where he essentially paused all types of police enforcement, and this included street vending. And so a lot of people that were unemployed saw this as an opportunity to generate some income during the pandemic. Fast forward a year later, here in New York City, when they started reopening the economy, as you would might call it, mm, and enforcement started kind of being implemented again. This was summer 2021, and more recently, as I mentioned, sanitation police. Basically, right now we have a cop mayor here in New York, Eric Adams, and just in March, April, he essentially power or um, agency in charge of street vendor enforcement. However, this does not mean that the New York Police Department isn't allowed to do any kind of enforcement.
Okay, I think we might have lost Eric in the middle of his speaking. So I'm going to come back to Eric. And I'm going to ask the same question next to Kobi Guillory. And they are a co-chair of the Chicago Alliance Against Racism and Political Repression. He's also a member of the Chicago Teachers Union and Freedom Road Socialist Organization. He grew up in Johannesburg, South Africa, and has been living in Chicago since 2015. He teaches middle school science in Inglewood. So I will have Kobi speak to what's happening in their organizing and their present work regards to policing. Go ahead, Kobi.
Hello, thank you for having me. So yeah, like you said, my name is Kobi, and I work with the Chicago Alliance Against Racism and Political Repression. That's my sort of my main organization. And the Chicago Alliance, or the National Alliance, was actually founded in 1973. So we're coming up on the 50th anniversary of it this year. It was founded out of a campaign to free Angela Davis and all political prisoners. And that sort of set the tone for the work that we've been doing over the last 50 years. You know, obviously I'm turning 27 this year, so I haven't been around the whole time. But for the past 4 years, I've been organizing with Harper here in Chicago. And we have two major campaigns going on. The first is the campaign for community control of the police. We've been working with families of people who have been killed by police, as well as torture survivors, people who were tortured into confessing to crimes that they didn't commit, basically to hold police accountable. And the issue that we've run into over the years is that, you know, when police investigate themselves, they find themselves innocent. And, you know, that just leaves communities being traumatized, you know, having lost loved ones, having, you know, lost decades of their lives because, you know, police wanted to do what they wanted to do with impunity. And what we're saying, and what the Black liberation movement has been saying for the past, you know, many decades, is that the people who are oppressed, you know, the people who live in these communities and who are impacted by police violence, need to have the power to end them. And the way that we have been doing that is through community control. We were fighting for the Civilian Police Accountability Council since 2012, when police killed Lakia Boyd in Chicago. And after the George Floyd rebellion in 2020, or let me rewind a little bit. So we had our National Refounding Conference in 2019. Before that, the National Alliance had sort of dwindled down to two chapters. It was just Chicago and St. Louis, Kentucky. But in 2019, we sort of looked at the situation around, you know, nationally, like what had been happening with, you know, in Ferguson, what had been happening in Florida, you know, after they killed Mike Brown, after they killed Trayvon Martin, you know, what was happening in Ohio, you know, when they killed Tamir Rice. We looked at all of that and we said that, you know, this organization is not just, this is not just a Chicago problem, right? This police violence that we're fighting is a national thing. So, you know, we need to be a national organization. So we refounded the National Alliance in 2019. We had a conference with about 1,000 people. And the next year, you know, there was not a year later, it was the George Floyd rebellion in 2020. And that sort of took our organizing to a whole new level because, you know, there were millions of people out there in the streets demanding justice, you know, demanding some sort of systemic change. So as of last year, we have about 22 cities, chapters in 22 different cities. That includes York, DC, Dallas, Jacksonville, Milwaukee, and of course Minneapolis. You know, we have the Twin Cities Coalition for Justice in Chicago. And all of these organizations have sort of been coordinating days of protest. We've been coordinating around getting community control of the police, holding police accountable, and things like that. And here in Chicago, because we've been around for the longest, it is sort of the most advanced here. We have, as of 2021, we joined up with other organizations fighting for police accountability. I'm sorry, there's an ending. But yeah, we're actually so we got the Empowering Communities for Public Safety Ordinance passed, which establishes local district councilors in each of the city's police districts, and those are the people who people can go to at their monthly meetings and tell them, what their issues are, the problems they have with police practice, which police officers they want to be held accountable. And then those district councilors take that information to the Community Commission for Public Safety, which is a citywide body that has power over CPD policy and things of that nature. So we're sort of working on this on the front of both policy and individual cases where police have killed someone. Somebody is in prison and they need to be somebody's in prison for a crime they didn't commit and they need to be let out. And the last thing I'll say, our other campaign is the campaign to free incarcerated survivors of torture. So people who were tortured into confessing to things that they didn't commit. A lot of them have been in there since the 90s, and it's been known for decades that they were tortured and that they didn't actually do the crime. But because of the system that we have, with these racist judges, racist prosecutors, and of course racist police officers, they are still behind bars. So what we're trying to do is get the governor to sign pardons for everybody who is tortured, and we're also putting pressure on the judges we're putting pressure on the prosecutors, to drop the charges. To that end, we join with the families of people who are wrongfully convicted, and we show up to court cases, just pack the courtroom and show the system that there are people, that there's a community here that is that will fight for these people if they're not on their own. Because the main thing that white supremacists do is try to divide and conquer people. So our sort of antidote to that is to unite and fight back, and that's basically what we've been doing. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Kobi. So next, I'm going to introduce another panelist, Gabriel Sanchez, who is a Colombian American born, raised in Georgia, who has organized with Atlanta DSA's electoral committee since 2020 and is currently on the steering committee. He also works in politics full-time and has been an organizer and policy advocate for many years in Metro Atlanta. He has been involved in the Stop Cop City movement since 2021 and has worked on other local issues and campaigns for reproductive justice, voting rights, paid leave, housing, immigration, and more. And I'm going to have him answer the next question, or the same question, talking about his present work in regards to police and policing.
Hey, sorry, can you turn on my video? For some reason, I can't turn it on anymore. Yeah, thank you. Sorry about that. Hey, y'all, I'm Gabriel Sanchez, he, him. So yeah, I've been doing a lot of work on the Cop City, but movement here in Atlanta, and just a little bit of background on, some of the stuff around what brought me to this point. But I grew up in Georgia all my life, except for 3 years where I lived in Miami, Florida, in middle school and high school. And actually, one of the biggest political awakenings for myself was in freshman year of high school when I went to the same school as Trayvon Martin did. He was a sophomore when I was a freshman, and that was when he was murdered by Zimmerman. And so I remember back then I had a lot of friends who knew him. I unfortunately did not personally know him myself, but that was one of the biggest moments where I started to recognize just how awfully Black people are treated in this country, as well as brown people, and the role that policing has. And, I really got involved in advocacy work starting around the pandemic. And that's when George Floyd was murdered as well. And I got involved with some of the stuff that DSA was doing at the time with defund APD and refund communities, which was called DARK at the time. And we were really involved in the Cop City movement when it first started back in 2021, when they introduced the resolution to lease out the land, destroying the forest and building a $90 million cop facility and a fake city, which is hence why we call it Cop City. And so I've been very active in that work since 2021. And, you know, we've had a couple of substantial votes where, you know, the votes did not go in the direction of the people. Both times in 2021 when they approved the lease, and then recently in a few months ago when they approved $67 million in taxpayer money for it. But we have not given up. We are currently in the fight for getting at least 60,000 valid signatures to get Cop City on the ballot in Atlanta, which would be the first time a referendum would be on the ballot in the city of Atlanta from petitions through the people. So we're really working hard to get that on the ballot this year so that we can actually have the people's voice in regards to this cop facility. And that's a lot of the main work I've been doing in that regard, and been helping lead the, I'm one of the quadrant captains in the city of Atlanta, and been helping lead the DSA events that we're doing throughout the summer. We've been canvassing since June, and we're hoping that, and we just got a huge win on Thursday with the court proceeding where they ruled in our favor. We had a big obstacle in the sense that we couldn't collect signatures. Only City of Atlanta residents could collect signatures, and that the courts ruled that was unconstitutional. And so now anyone in Georgia can collect signatures, which would really, really give us a boost. And our 60-day window to collect signatures will reset. So, you know, we've really had a huge victory in the past couple of days, and that's really give a lot of wind in our sails to move this campaign forward and get it on the ballot. So we're really excited about the work that we're doing. We're hoping that we will get it through to the finish line in the next couple of months.
Awesome. Thank you, Gabrielle. And it looks like we have Eric back. Technology sucks sometimes, so I'm going to have Eric finish talking. Thanks, Eric.
Yes, thank you. Oh, sorry about that. I don't know what happened there with my internet, but I think I just wanted to wrap up the section on my response to the question about what the present work is right now for street vendors here in New York City. You know, right now, street vendors, you know, they operate on the sidewalks of New York. As you all should know, you know, it's a small city in terms of area, and what I left off saying earlier was that, you know, Mayor Eric Adams recently shifted police powers from one agency to another agency, which is the Department of Sanitation. And the Department of Sanitation here in New York has its own police branch, which is called just police sanitation. And really, you know, these folks have you know, essentially the same power as regular police. And they look like police, not just in terms of like appearance, like uniform, but behavior. But this shift in powers from one agency to another agency right now doesn't affect or exclude regular New York Police Department from also doing street vendor enforcement. You know, it seems to be part of the New York City charter that allows the police to do street vendor enforcement. And you know, right now, one of the campaigns that we're going to be have been working on since last year has been legalizing street vending in general. And part of that legalization of street vending also includes the decriminalization of street vending. Specifically, we want to not have there be criminal liability for street vending, no kind of criminal record for street vendors, because the fact of the matter is the majority of street vendors are immigrant communities with all types of legal statuses. And we don't want them to get caught up in the criminal justice system, which could lead to potential deportations. And, you know, I think for now, we'll leave it there with regards to the question about what the present work is with police and policing here in New York and street vending. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Eric. So next, the question is going to be, what roles, past or present, have the police played in the United States? In other words, how should we understand the police and their role? And I'm going to have Kobi go first to answer this question.
Hello. Yeah, so what the role of the police in the United States, I think it's pretty central to the history of this country, which is this country started out of the genocide of indigenous people and the enslavement of Africans. So the police sort of evolved as that as the enslavement changed forms, went from the plantation to sharecropping to the sort of segregation system that still kind of survives right now. The police, changed form from slave catchers to the KKK to, the current police who are running around shooting people.
It's okay that we're running for
now. So I know I have a lot more time, but it is a pretty I'm just going to give a pretty straightforward answer, which is that the role of the police within this white supremacist society is to uphold and reinforce white supremacy by making sure that Black communities are not able to thrive. And I think the way that we counteract that is by getting together and as diverse oppressed communities, Black, Chicano, immigrants, whatever group of people are oppressed by the police, have an interest in uniting to gain control and to formulate their own systems of public safety. So yeah, I'm sorry. I know I had like 7 minutes, but yeah, that's what I see, and I think my organization as well sees as the role of police in the U.S.
Awesome. Thank you, Kobi. And I'm going to go next to Gabriel. It looks like you unmuted.
Sorry, I got it. There you go. Thanks so much, Sarah. Yeah, but as we all know, the police started out as slave patrols in the United States, and that racist and capitalist origin is what informs the way policing is done today. They can claim that it's different, but it really is just a straight lineage from that. Everything from slavery to the first labor strikes in the early 1900s to the civil rights movements to the Black Lives Matter movement today. They have been doing the same authoritarian repression of the people on the behest of the capitalist class and the government that the capitalist class has corrupted. So I think it's always really important that when we talk about policing, that we always emphasize the systematic nature of the oppression, because I feel like a lot of people always get down in the weeds of like, oh, but not all cops are bad. But it's not about an individual person, right? Yeah, it doesn't matter what they do outside of when they're police. When they put on that uniform, they become a part of that system, regardless of who they are as a person otherwise. And I think we have to remember that when you become a part of that system and you don't do anything to fight it, you become complicit in it. And as we know, that system's main goal is to be oppressive and to protect the wealthy elite. The police is an authoritarian arm of our corrupt government that is bought off by special interests in the wealthy elite. So it's only obvious they'll be used in order for those purposes, in order to represent those interests and not the interests of the people. And that's something that I think a lot of people don't understand. It's something that we need to educate people on, because that's the reason why we have so much trouble getting the changes that we need in the society that we want to see, is that they have this repressive force that continues to undermine and repress any of these radical movements that will make the change necessary to make the people's lives better. This is why we have to fight not only the police, but also the propaganda machine that backs them in the media, through the government, etc., which has convinced the majority of people in this country that they are necessary and are the solution to crime, when that is not the case at all. And so I think that's that making that role clear and making the systemic oppression clear. And you know how we talk about systemic racism is the same thing with systemic racism when it comes to policing specifically, systemic oppression of the working class through the police. We have to make that clear and educate people on that. And I think that's the best way you can get people to recognize their true role and why they are not, in the end, going to help us get to the changes that we want to see.
Thank you. That was awesome. Next, I'm going to have Eric speak on the same question.
Sure. I think that, as socialists, we need to trace the origins and especially in this country, and I believe Kobi and Gabriel spoke to this as well, but on the slaveholders' constitution, specifically the Fugitive Slave Act of 1793. I think that the fight against police state is the fight for democracy, and the Fugitive Slave Act of 1793 allowed for a group of people, proto police, whatever we want to call them, to pursue, capture people that were considered property. And so at the core of this society, is this constitution consider people property. And I think that what we're seeing now and with the police is the continuation of that logic of defending private property. Sure, we might have abolished slavery, but I think as socialists, the role for us is to fight the police state, because it's the fight for democracy. And in the case right now with street vendors, right, the policing of public space and the giving priority to big corporations to take up using the space, or even smaller corporations at the expense of informal or unlicensed and unpermitted vendors, is unfair to the vast majority of people that don't have access to formal means of employment. And I think that the other way we should understand police and the evolution of police is through industrialization and the way that they used to be hired to break strikes. And so I think that's another way of approaching the question of police. They're not allies to the working class. It's exactly the opposite. And I don't know if I have much time left, but I think it's important to look at these legal mechanisms that uphold private property and allow for the police to behave in arbitrary and undemocratic ways towards the general population. And that should inform the tactics and strategies we should be using when when organizing with other working class people on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. So next, I'm going to ask the question, what would it look like to solve the various problems associated with police and policing in this country? Which I know is a tough question, but I'm going to have Gabriel go next.
Thank you, Sarah. It's a very long road to fixing something that is so entrenched in our society for so long. And they have, they have the resources, they have the wealthy elite and the government backing them. But not only that, they even have many, many working class people that we still have, supporting the police because they've been taught that their whole lives. The propaganda has been so strong. That's the default position for many people until they learn better. And so I think what we really need to work on is educating the public and making them realize that we do not need to prioritize the police or have the police be the solution to crime, because they're not. The solution to crime is investing in people and investing in communities, healthcare, education, housing, a living wage, community centers. There's so many more different things. There's so much money that we give to police that can be used for things that would be significantly better for communities and would significantly reduce crime. Because why would anyone want to go through the normal path of getting a job, moving up the ladder, et cetera, if there is no way for that way of life no longer guarantees comfortable living anymore? Why would anyone want to go down that path when they could go down other paths that may be more risky, but will probably provide for their families? Because that's what the source of crime almost always is people are just trying to survive and get by and provide for themselves or their loved ones. And when we take that away from people from the normal path, it's only obvious that they're going to take other paths to find that. And it's ridiculous that we even have to tell this concept to people, but it seems like people just do not understand that unless they see it themselves, or because they've been corrupted by wealthy interests and no longer have the interests of the people in mind. I had an example of this where I had a in-house person who lived in my apartment for like 8 months, and he had a problem with epilepsy. He had regular seizures, and so he would try his best to find work all the time, but he would always get fired because we live in a right to work state in Georgia, first off, and second off, because he would have seizures on the job and they wouldn't want someone that has that working for them. And yet, despite that, he was denied disability and he was denied housing for 2 years. He only just recently was able to get housing, thank God. But I don't know what would have happened to him if he hadn't been staying in my apartment. And that's the story for millions of people across this country. And instead of helping them, and instead of trying to do better for them, they would rather criminalize them. He would tell me all the time that how tempting it was to just start, doing illegal, selling drugs, whatever it is, just to get by. But fortunately, he decided that he didn't want to do that. But there are so many people who have no choice. And it's not just that we have the wealthiest country in the world and we cannot provide for our people. And so one of the main reasons for that is because we spend so much money on things that don't matter instead of spending money on the things that do matter. And this is one of those things where we spend so much money on policing instead of actually trying to fix the root problem of crime, which is investing in our communities. Communities with resources don't have crime issues because they don't need to. So it's such a simple concept, and yet it's sometimes it can be so mind-blowing how people do not understand that. And that's the fight that we have to do, is to educate people. And that's why I think when we're fighting all these issues, like for example with the Stop Cop City movement, these are not just for this moment, but it's also for the broad movement, the long-term movement, to have these discussions with people and to move that needle forward, to show them like, you can imagine a better world than this. We don't need this. What we need is to invest in the community. And I think we need to continue fighting for finding issues that we can fight against or for in our local politics in order to have these discussions with our communities and show them what a better world can look like.
Awesome, thank you. Up next, I'm gonna have Eric.
No, great. Going off the investing in communities that Gabriel mentioned. Here in New York, for example, something that we've been like, the issue for street vending is that there's a cap, this like long ago cap, arbitrary cap on street vending, meaning that there's a limit on how many licenses and how many permits are available at any given moment for street vending. And essentially what that does is that it creates this situation in which vendors that don't have those permits or licenses are have to do this illegally or unpermitted and whatnot. What we've been arguing for is for there to be, rather than take these very punitive measures of police enforcement and incarceration, or even giving tickets and summonses, right? Rather than doing that, there should be investment in education. And if you were to lift the cap or like eliminate the cap on permits and licenses available, and try to regulate the economy a little bit more, and in that process of obtaining the licenses and permits, it is already a requirement for vendors to become aware of certain rules and regulations that they need to follow to be able to do their job. And so that would be a tremendous help. But given that real estate here in New York has such a hold on the economy, real estate doesn't is it's not in their interest for this to happen, right? Another issue that we recently faced here in New York, with some comrades that had set up a open air market in Sunset Park, Brooklyn. Shout out to Mexicanos Unidos and Plaza Tonatiuh, is that, and this is an agency I didn't mention earlier, but basically parks, also the Parks Department has their own enforcement agencies, and inside of the Parks Department, inside of the Parks property, there's a different system for street vending. There's it's an auction system or bidding system where the highest bidder gets access to permits and licenses inside of the park and around the sidewalk that wraps around the park. And the reason why this is set up that way is because there's a lack of investment in our parks departments, right? And one of the ways in which they are able to fundraise for that is through this bidding system. And so this effectively excludes a bunch of working class people from being able to work inside of the parks and sell something legally. And lastly, I think that they, in terms of solving these issues, I think that we need to be able to really work, shoulder to shoulder with some of these communities that are dealing with police enforcement on a daily basis, and see what kind of creative solutions they're coming up with. Here in New York, the gig economy workers that work for the delivery applications, they were dealing with a lot of bike theft, and these are their bicycle electric bikes and all kind of other mopeds and stuff like that. They were being stolen, and the police was not responding to their calls for retrieving their means of subsistence back, right? And some of these guys, the other thing was that when they were crossing bridges, it was unsafe for them. They were being assaulted, they were being robbed, and so what they ended up doing is organizing crossing the bridges that were unsafe, and as groups, like as a squad. And every time they got to the foot of the bridge, a few of them would wait until a group got bigger, and then they would cross together versus going across the bridge alone. And I think the working class has the working classes have such a creative way of coming up with solutions that might not fit very neatly within what elected officials and other authorities have in mind, or would be able to condone. some of these guys even went so much as like doing their own like detective work, putting GPS things on their bicycles and then retrieving those bicycles for themselves. And I think lastly, elected officials, especially those that we endorse and that we uh, uh, campaign for or do canvassing for, I think we should really set a higher bar for them to not, when issues come up about policing, they should know better than to side with the police or remain silent on that. And they should be siding with independent working class organizations like Mexicanos Unidos and many more organizations that are organizing on a daily basis and on the ground against police violence, police enforcement, and the police state. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Eric. I saw emojis popping in the chat, so love that. And keep the Q&A coming. We've got lots of good Q&A so far. Up next, I'm going to have Kobi speak to the question that was just asked, which was, what would it look like to solve the various problems associated with the police and policing in this country? So go ahead, Kobi.
Yeah, so yeah, I think what solving the problems related to policing looks like is kind of an extension of what we're already doing, in the sense that, people are already organized. People already, people understand when they see injustice, right? Like we all watched, for decades, we've been looking at police killing black people and brown people on the streets. And people have been sort of spontaneously fighting against that. And I think what, solving the issue ultimately looks like just realizing that it is a class issue, right? Because, it's so obvious that when you invest in communities, those communities are safer and happier, and they have more resources because they're getting investment. But the people who are in political and economic power don't want black and brown communities to be happy, right? They want to squeeze as much labor and as much money out of them as they can. So that's why it's on us. It's on working class people. It's on oppressed people to unite and fight against the people who want us to be oppressed and exploited. So I'm actually just coming back from tabling for community control of the police. We've been getting people involved in their in the activities of their local district councils, because we can. It was great when we got this law passed in 2021. Like, we celebrated and we were happy about that. But at the same time, we understand that it's not just about getting something down on paper, right? It's about mobilizing people, right? Ultimately, to solve all the problems around policing, like, we're going to have to restructure this entire society. It's going to take, millions and millions of people being mobilized, to in all kinds of different avenues. So, some people fighting against police crimes, some people, people who are doing mutual aid and stuff, that's proving that communities can take care of themselves. All these different avenues that we have to fight through, like joining together with those. So, like, in the labor movement, immigrant rights movements, and the LGBTQ rights movement, the women's rights movement. So all of these, like, the cutting edge of those is the police. So, what it takes to solve it is a whole systematic overhaul of this country, basically a revolution, where working class people and oppressed people are going to have the power to decide what their communities look like. Because right now they don't have what their communities look like is being decided for them by people who want to exploit them. So, just fighting for political power through legislation, like I think Gabriel and Eric said, fighting, putting pressure on elected officials, and then fighting economically through labor unions, through strikes, fighting within the community around issues that affect all of us. That builds up solidarity, and that builds up just the capacity to make the changes that we want to see.
Awesome. Thank you, Kobi. So next we're going to have Q&A. So we have a couple of Q&As that people have already submitted. The first one is going to be for Gabriel. And that's, can Gabriel speak to Cop City, and can we get 25,000 signatures within the 60-day window?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Yeah, so we currently have 30,000 signatures as of July 25th, and we need 58,000 exactly, or more or less. Sorry, but we do expect a lot of signatures to be thrown out because we know the city of Atlanta is going to be playing games, and we also have had some invalid signatures. But so our real goal is really closer to like 70, anywhere from 70 to 100,000 signatures to try to make sure that we, even when signatures get thrown out, we still reach the ballot threshold. So it took us about 40 days to get to 30,000, and with the extra 60 days we have, that gives us a total of about I believe 80 days, if I'm not mistaken. No, I believe it gives us an extra 100 days, so 100 days total now. And so we believe that with that extra time, we can certainly get to probably anywhere from 80 to 100,000 signatures. And we're growing our campaign exponentially as well. Just this month, we started a paid canvas program because we were able to secure funding for it. And that has been growing exponentially every week. And that is really going to be a big boost to our signature collection, because the vast majority of signatures collected so far have been mainly volunteer canvassing. And so we think the paid canvassing is really going to be a game changer, especially now that we have those extra 60 days. We are still trying to get, so there's a lot of very weird rules when it comes to the law in the election law in Georgia for obvious reasons. So we have technically, if we want to see the ballot on November ballot, we have to get all the signatures in by August 14th. So that's still currently our deadline, our self-imposed deadline. However, if we don't reach the goal by then, we are certainly going to continue collecting signatures until the end of the 60 days, which will be at the end of September. And that would mean it would be in the March ballot. One of the main reasons we wanted it on the November ballot is just because it's a slightly better electorate, since the March ballot is going to be the Republican presidential primary, which would likely not be as favorable voting pool. But regardless of what ends up happening, we're still going to continue fighting to get it on the ballot either way. And once it is on the ballot, going out and campaigning for a yes vote, since we're asking it to be repealed on the ballot. So we want people to vote yes to repeal it. And that's the current state of the Cop City campaign. I think, again, that lawsuit was a game changer, and I think it really is likely that we're going to get it on the ballot.
Thank you so much, Gabriel. So our next question is, I'm going to read a little bit about what the person said before the question, which is street vending was decriminalized here in DC as well, and it's great. But now we're running into different issues where vendors are vulnerable to climate change. For example, trees are being cut down to make room for more real estate, and vendors cannot operate under these unsafe hot conditions. So the question for the panelists is, how do we knit together the need to decriminalize nonviolent acts and the need to restore a more environmentally just public space? I'm going to pass it to Eric.
I really, really like this question. I believe it's Selma. Yes, hope I pronounced it right. I here in New York, it's as I mentioned earlier, it's a very dense city, and we don't have a lot of room. And so it's kind of wild to see so many cars out in the streets, right? And so I think one way, right, to link together these non-criminal activities like street vending and with environmental change or climate crisis is to stop prioritizing sort of this car-centric lifestyle, invest more into and improve and invest our public infrastructure, which includes everything from public transportation, waste disposal. This is a really big issue with street vendors because there's very, very few waste bins. You can go walk for blocks to dispose all manner of types of garbage. And the rules for street vendors right now is that they're expected to take their waste home. And what that ends up happening is that they can get in trouble with their landlords if the landlord finds out that they're running a business out of their homes. And so really, I think that what the city needs to do is invest in not just waste, regular waste, but also in the case of food vendors, making, building or creating more, we call them commissaries here, where people can store their food carts, their food trucks, and also in those commissaries, get rid of adequately of oil and grease, because what happens is there's a lack of access to this kind of infrastructure. It gets disposed by into sewage, and that then clogs up the sewage for the neighborhood and other brick and mortars. And also in terms of like trying to address the issue of crime, if you're able to close off blocks at a, like make uh, uh, more pedestrian friendly streets and close it off from like regular car traffic, you would help reduce some of the crime, because the more people are outside, the less likely it's going to happen that people are going to want to commit crimes in broad daylight or just in front of a whole bunch of people that are present. And just making only the biggest avenues available for cars and stuff like that, and bus routes. I think that there's just like so much that can be done, but as I mentioned earlier this morning, I was, vendors in Corona Plaza, Queens were being displaced, and the plaza itself, even though it's like supposed to be for pedestrians, doesn't have that much tree canopy. And so like a lot of vendors have to use like these canopies that are technically illegal for them to use. And so I agree completely. It's great that they see decriminalize street vending, but it's absolutely unfair that they have to work in those conditions. 100-degree weather right now, and the sun is just really terrible. And even also another thing that I forgot to mention, just even access to just public restrooms. This is not just an issue for street vendors, but just the general public, right? And yeah, I hope that answered some of those questions. I think that street vendors and street vending economy, which is very hyper local, is can provide some very interesting answers to some of these climate related issues. Oh, one last thing, sorry, about closing down streets. Before the pandemic, they considered it impossible to do that because of the cars and other stuff. But suddenly during the pandemic, here in New York, we had the Open Streets program, which allowed for restaurants to use up parking spots that were normally reserved for cars, for seating, so that people wouldn't have to go indoors, right? And so I thought that was really interesting, because it's very convenient that this retail space that restaurants pay rent towards, the landlords and the developers, it was not an issue for them to adapt to the situation, which was the pandemic. But now that we're sort of 3 years into it, we're finding it difficult to make it to include street vendors in this open streets program. And this is an issue that we've been dealing with here in New York as well.
Thank you, Eric. Up next, I'm gonna have Kobi answer that question as well.
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Yeah, definitely. So the question is, how do we knit together the need to decriminalize nonviolent acts and the need to restore a more environmentally just public space?
Yeah, I think one thing, like whenever we're pushing for policy, like we have to sort of take a mass approach and just get as many people involved in the struggle as possible, because like when you look at, for example, Stop Cop City, like there's a huge environmental component to that. Same as
I think the Line 3 pipeline a couple of years ago. There were protests around that, and the first people who came to shut down the protests, I mean, of course, were the police. So I think making sure that people have the right to protest, making sure that people have the right to just exist in public space, is a huge part of taking those steps towards environmental justice, because then we can also protest freely, for for the things that we need and against the things that are hurting our communities. And in addition to that, we need to just recognize that all of these struggles are interconnected, because there are there's a whole bunch of laws that are just made to trap people, right? That are just made to fuel mass incarceration, and those laws need to be changed. But we can't change them from from a position of powerlessness, right? Like, we have to build up our organizations, build up our organizing capacity, mobilize as many people as we can, which, because like the environmental situation is getting worse because of capitalism, and because like all these different social crises are getting worse because capitalism is decaying. More and more people are becoming aware of how these struggles are interconnected and how terrible it is that you can't just support yourself, support your life, support yourself and support your family without somebody coming in and harassing you with a gun. So the more people become aware, the easier it is to unite these different struggles together and start fighting back against the police who are oppressing us.
Awesome. Thank you, Kobi. All right, so up next, we have another question that says, since policing and racism are literally required by those at the top in order to maintain the capitalism that ensures they will stay at the top, it seems to me that we are never going to be able to make significant headway on either policing or racism without simultaneously exposing the false ideology capitalism is based on and educating the public about this. What efforts are being made to do this? And I'm going to have Gabriel speak on this one first.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, this is a really important question because, like I was saying earlier, you have to always have in the mindset when you're in these issue campaigns that it's not just about this one issue, but it's also about building a longer term movement that will lead to the change that we need. And, that's why we have a lot of these, with Atlanta DSA, we try to make sure that we incorporate socialism into everything that we do, because that is the solution to solving pretty much all, almost all the issues we have in our society today. It's the root cause of a lot of these things goes back to capitalism, the profit motive, the greed that we see amongst the wealthiest elite and those who they paid off. And so I think that a lot of people, especially in America, are very propagandized to, against socialism, the word socialism and communism and all of that. And so I think we really have to unpack those words for people and really show them what it really means to have a socialist society and how that is about the community and about the collective, and about bringing everyone up and raising all ships. Which I think a lot of people have those values. And especially when you talk about specific issues, a lot of people are on our side. The problem is the ideological perspective isn't there. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But because of that, we have to do the work in everything that we do of slowly pushing people towards, understanding the world in a more connected way, as Kobi was saying earlier, that everything is connected, and that this one issue of Cop City is also connected to the environmental protections we're trying to put in Georgia for in other places, like the protecting the coastline from getting fracking, for example. And it's that understanding that we need to get to people, and we can only do that by educating them and having real discussions with people and building relationships with people. And so, you know, we in Atlanta DSA, we always make an effort to have those questions about socialism with people we're having conversations with, and ask them what other issues they care about, if they want to get more involved, if they want to learn more in general. Because it's important. We need to make sure that we don't just come back, you know, and just say like, all right, here's this issue. Can you do this? Okay, we're good. It's like, no, we're building a relationship with these people. We're starting to bring people in as a community. And if, you know, with the socialist vision that we have, if we want to be able to build a collective, we have to start that with everything that we do when in regards to our advocacy, by building a community through our advocacy. And people really respond to that when they have someone that they can trust and they know and they believe in and they have a good relationship with. They're more likely to help them in the things that they want and work with them on the issues that they care about. And so I think we just need to make an active effort to build the community through these movements and through these issue campaigns, so that we can all come together as a collective to work for the greater good.
Awesome. Thank you for your answer. All right, next I'm going to have Eric answer this question as well. Let me know if you need me to repeat it too.
Thank you. No, it's a really great question, and I think something that that I constantly come back to is politicizing workplace issues, right? So, you know, with vendors, for example, like as I mentioned earlier, their employment, right? Their job, their workplace is itself, in for all intents and purposes, illegal, unpermitted, unlicensed, right? And so, according to the laws that govern the city, they're not allowed. Their mere existence on the sidewalks is not deemed okay, or shouldn't be allowed. But as I also mentioned, is that the vast majority of these folks are from different immigrant communities, and in many cases, their legal statuses are also in flux and potentially undocumented. And so it's good to find ways in which you can connect both things, right? Their workplace issues that have to do with their, you know, economic situation, whether it's, you know, in the case of street vendors, or whether it's off the books workers in construction sites, or you know, as I mentioned earlier, gig economy delivery app workers that have to rent another person's application from them because they themselves are not able to have the application under their name because they're not documented, tying that right to the battle for democracy and exposing the fact that this country is highly undemocratic, because a lot of the people that come from other countries come with a very strong assumption that this country is a country of rule, law, and order, and that there is a democracy in place. But how can you believe that while simultaneously not being able to vote in this country, right? Where you're not allowed to make the same amount of money as, you know, a U.S. citizen is able to make just because of your legal status, right? And so I think connecting this what was the word that was in the question? The illusion of capitalism, or I forget the word right now. I don't want to go to the prompt, but you know, connecting that right to something political, because sometimes it's difficult to discuss capitalism in the abstract, and it's important to make it concrete. And you know, when you have something like the U.S. Constitution that doesn't allow peoples to not vote, you know, that's very, very tangible. And there's a literal document, right, that says that you're not allowed, and we're not going to let you until something very drastic changes. And that makes the abstract practical. I think that's one way to go about it. And I think I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you, Eric. Next, I'm gonna have Kobi speak on the last question.
Yeah, I think it's a really great question, and I agree with what Eric said, that it's a matter of making it more concrete, more practical, and less like abstract and intellectual, because people learn from how they live, right? So in the workplace, for example, like if someone's being exploited by their boss, like their hours are being cut, they're being made to come in and work excessive hours of overtime or whatever the case may be, that's not just because their boss is an asshole, right? Like that's because their boss is incentivized by capitalism to squeeze as many hours out of them as possible and pay them as little as possible. So, once the more people work through their unions, the more people fight against their bosses, and fight against the companies and the corporations that employ them, the more people realize that like this is a systemic thing. So at the same time that we're going through this practice, like for example, after every strike or even every union meeting, it's important to like come together and just say like, why did this happen? What happened? Why did this happen? So like, for another example, if we go to like when we're doing court watching, right? Somebody is in prison for the past 30 years on a crime that they didn't commit, because they were tortured by the police, or because the police like coerced a witness to make a false statement against them. The more you do this court watching, the more you realize like it's not just this judge or that judge, it's every single one, because that's the system. So yeah, it's just very important to keep things practical, but also at the same time, one thing that always well, before I get into that, one thing that we emphasize, we work sort of in a united front kind of way, where like I've been a communist for a while, but everybody that we work with is not necessarily doesn't necessarily share our political views. We have coalitions of people of all over the political spectrum, except of course the right wing. But what we say is that we have a united front of action, right? Not a united front of ideas. So whether you're a liberal, an anarchist, a socialist, or whatever the case may be, if you have an interest in fighting against police crimes, if you have an interest in fighting against, or if this is your workplace and you have an interest in being paid more, we have something to unite around. We have something to fight for, and through that fight, like I said, more and more people will learn what kind of system they're living in. And the last thing I'll say, just something that makes me optimistic, I think, is that like the ruling class, like they have all kinds of money, they have all kinds of power, but if they were all powerful, like my family would still be on a plantation right now. Like they don't get everything that they want. And there's been centuries of people fighting back against, centuries of indigenous people, Black people, centuries of immigrants, and women's rights movements fighting against the capitalists and winning. And like that's like any progress that we've made in the past 400 years of this capitalist system, like that's us. We made that. So I think it's important to keep that in mind, like keep that historical perspective that any changes forward, whether it's incremental, whether it's like these small concessions. I mean, it might feel small, but like we have to fight for everything that we're going to get. So that's just something that we should also keep in mind and make sure that the people that we're working with understand that like nothing is going to come passively. The ruling class is never going to grow a conscience. So we just have to get it done.
Thank you, Kobi. So I'm going to have one final question for the panelists. But before I get to that, we are going to have someone speak for the Abolitionist Working Group afterwards in their amazing toolkit. So hang tight. The next question is going to be asked to all the candidates. I'm going to have Eric go first. Just any closing final thoughts and anything that particularly excites you about the future for police reform.
Or abolition, and or both. I think when it comes to the subject that I've been discussing with street vending and just in general, like the way that police enforcement and the police state affect uh, non-US citizens. Um, you know, I think that something that excites me here in New York, we have a working group called Latino Socialistas, and I think something that would go a long way in promoting either police reform or abolition would be incorporating like language justice into our work in the DSA and the chapters that we're a part of. Because of the fact of the matter is that the working class is very multiracial, multilingual working class, and this is true from the early stages, early decades of the socialist movement abroad and here. And so, some of the most amazing socialist organizing, activism, and even abolitionism, right, was always multiracial. And so, there was publications, all types of languages, and I think we need to sort of tap into that again, reach out across the borders in other countries that are also fighting, having their fights there, and having some kind of exchange in terms of like tactics and strategies and politics generally. And so for me, at least here in New York, some of the exciting work that something that excites me is building up the language uh, uh, aspect of communicating vis-a-vis interpretation and um, translating foreign materials. I forgot to mention, but at the work that I do over at the Schumann Project, something that I think is really important that we've been doing is, we have organizers that speak different languages. Uh, we had a Mandarin speaker, we had an Arabic speaker, a Bangla speaker, myself as a Spanish speaker, and this is something that we should be doing as well as socialists in our own organization. So I think that's something that's really exciting for me.
Thank you, Eric, and thank you for being here. All right, up next, I'm going to have Kobi answer the final question. Any final thoughts or anything that excites you?
Yeah, something that really just gives me optimism for the future is like the fact that 5 years ago, I would go into socialist meetings, particularly like anti-imperialist meetings, and I'd be like by far the youngest person there. Like I'd be the only person under the age of 60. But after 2020, I think something kind of shifted, or it was already shifting then, but it was kind of like the boiling point where now it's like there's high schoolers, who want to become revolutionaries. There's people, very like there's student movements. There's just more and more youth getting involved and in revolutionary organizing, and just like more people. I think that's like just very crucial. Like we're starting to be active in cities where I never even would have imagined that they had 5 people who wanted to hold the police accountable in that city, but they, it's growing, right? And one thing I want to shout out is my comrade Frank Chapman's book, Marxist-Leninist Perspectives on Black Liberation and Socialism, that kind of gives a historical perspective on, the fight for Black liberation throughout the 1800s up until the 20th century, and why it's so important to fight for self-determination. As an oppressed group of people, Black people need to be able to control our own situation, and as with every oppressed group. So the fact that there's things being written about that in the 21st century, we don't have to. As much as I love Du Bois, I don't have to just look to Du Bois for that kind of revolutionary writing. People are doing that right now, and I think that again speaks to the sort of explosive growth of the movement in the past 3 years. So, I'm definitely optimistic.
Awesome, thank you. And next, I'm gonna have our last panelist speak. Gabriel, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I mean, right now I'm actually in the what is usually DSA office, but has become the field office for the Cop City movement, one of the 2 field offices we have. And I just feel like, we're making this coalition of organizers and radical activists are making history right now with this Cop City movement because, we have, the South is a very unique region that has a lot of unique challenges. And, I don't, obviously the challenges all over the country are insane, but like these Southern people, man, sometimes, my God, they're the people in power over here are just, sometimes it feels like you can't do anything, but I think this is definitely, I've been involved in politics for several years, but this is definitely one of the highlights of, me doing this work because it's incredible to see how many people are coming together in Atlanta and in Georgia, in the metro Atlanta area, and even in Georgia overall, and across the country, and even across the world about Cop City, which is insane to me. And like, it really gives you hope that things are shifting. People are waking up. People are done and tired, and we're gonna put in the work to start making the difference and making the changes that we need to see because, there's just no reason to not fight the power anymore. These people are brazenly greedy, selfish, and oppressive, and we have to do everything in our power to stop them and to make a better world for ourselves. And I think stuff like Cop City, stuff like the labor stuff that's going on all over the country, all these movements that we're seeing happening right now since 2020, since 2016 has been incredible to watch. And so it may seem like a huge, huge undertaking and a very uphill battle, but I think that this is a fantastic moment for us to realize that we are going to make the change and we are going to decide what world we want to see in the future. And I think we can make it happen and make the better world that we want to see. So I'm very excited to see that. And I'm sure I'm going to see everyone who's on this panel and everyone in the audience, people like that all over in the future in some way or fashion. So I'm looking forward to working with all of you to make that happen. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you to all our amazing panelists and all our attendees for joining us on Saturday. And I'm going to hand it off to Celia, who's going to talk about the Abolition Working Group and the work they've been doing and also their toolkit, which everyone should check out. All right, I'll hand it over to you.
All right, thank you, Sarah. So yes, my name is Sella Lewis. I go by the pronoun she, they. I am the co-chair for the Metro DC DSA's Defund MPD working group. We have been working for the past 3 years since the summer of 2020 to imagine a world without police. We are the second most policed region in the country when you add the federal police, the Secret Service, campus police, and a whole host of other layers of federal level policing in this city. Combine that with a very walkable city, it is you stumble over a cop everywhere you go. You'll find cops in your metro, you find cops on your street, and so it becomes very evident that this is something that we are contributing too much to at the tremendous sacrifice of, like, as many of the panelists have spoken to, the access to public space, the access to just be, the access to truly feel liberated. As part of my co-chair efforts, I was curious about what's happening at the national level. I know that it can be very easy to get very siloed about the things that are happening in your city or your town or your community. And so I got involved in the National Abolition Working Group to figure out how can we connect our struggles together? How can we knit ourselves to a larger struggle so that we are working together and understanding the bigger picture here so that we don't lose our motivation, but we find ways to really practically engage. As our comrade Eric stated before, it's very hard to explain capitalism in the abstract. So finding ways to make it practical is key. And so one of the things that I try to do, and many of the other folks who put together this toolkit, and I'll share it in the chat, is to now start to organize practically around those things. We have had many comrades, I'll share it in the chat, who've organized around no new jails, no more jail beds, like as many people have said, decriminalizing. So we're working to decriminalize sex work. As we've said, we've successfully, after many years, decriminalized street vending. One of the things I like to tout is the work that we're doing around austerity budgeting and austerity measures through a really great exercise we call Defund and Refund the District. We've also hosted brake light clinics where we change out people's brake lights. I know that that's been happening all over the country, but these are very practical ways you can start to reach your community, talk to the people in the community, and really listen to them too. Really share some of your struggles. I think that a lot of folks don't realize we actually have comrades who face the fist of the police state. You know, a broad swath of people. They're not always the people who we think. And if we take the time to listen to one another in these kinds of direct actions, we can build up our capacity to really not be afraid to take on the cops. You know, when I've lived in this city 17 years, and I often just sort of just look past the cops. Now I'm at a point where I have no problem just directly confronting them. And that's a journey. And it's not easy when you do it together. And through these kind of really practical applications, you can do so. So I got one more ask of you all. I know I got like 1 minute left. I'm going to ask that you join us, join the National Abolition Working Group. Like you all, we're comrades just like you. We have lives and we get tired, we get burned out, and we really need leaders to show up. So I'm going to ask you to reach out to Brett Robertson. He's the a new member of the steering committee. He's for the North New Jersey DSA. I've left his contact information in the chat, so please reach out. Please join our Slack. We are like you all, we have lives, we have stressors on our lives. I know I do, but we really need people to step up and help keep this movement strong. That is the only way we win, is get off the sidelines, start participating, and start leading a lot of this work. And I will hand it off back to Sarah. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's always great. It's always great to end on what we can do. So I would encourage everyone to contact Britt if they want to get involved. And also, I'm going to talk with the National Political Education Committee, which has hosted this webinar today. So some ways to keep up with our events, because we will have more. You can check us out on social media, and I'm going to have someone drop the links as I speak. We also have a website, so you can stay up to date on what we're doing. And then we also have our email newsletter. So we do have the red letter. Yeah, there we go. All the links just dropped. So I encourage everyone to check that out. And yeah, thank you all for coming, spending your Saturday with us or part of it, and have a good rest of your weekend. And I'll see some of you in Chicago, I'm sure.